them, and then we'll fit Guy in after Ben.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to, oh, share the screen. There it is. So I'm trying to get, oh, Chrome tab. Okay.
Okay, let's see, there we go. We're seeing it now, Eric. Thank you. Thanks for jumping in.
Yep. Yep, no problem. Put it on presentation mode. Yeah, thanks very much. So this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about a data framework, spatial data analysis support and fishery impact tool that several of us from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center and from the Greater Atlantic Regional Office have been working on now for about a year or so. So it's basically a very, it's been a team project, and so I'm going to move on from there. Essentially, what we were looking at a number of years ago, and everybody is looking at the same thing, and they're basically looking at this map of wind energy development areas, and we think, so well, Houston, we have a problem. We have a large number of proposed development sites, and at various points in time, we were receiving data requests from different developers, and more importantly, the data requests were pretty much kind of a little bit all over the map. There were, in some cases, we were getting data requests for things that did not exist. In other cases, and the other potential problem is that a lot of the data that was being requested was confidential. So we had to overcome some of those issues in terms of addressing the need for information on essentially what's going on in these different development sites. So we basically had a need for a standardized data support. It needed to be replicable, and by that I mean we can use the same decision rules, same data sets to across different wind energy sites, and it needed to be reproducible. And I mean by that I mean if you run a data query, provide data at one point in time, and you were to request the same data and run it again, it's at a later date, you get the same data. So it needed to be widely applicable across wind energy areas, and it needed to be to assure that you were able to produce the same data set each time you ran a data query. In terms of, and we also were interested in creating a separate report, particular standardized metrics of economic impact. In terms of data, we actually ended up choosing a vessel trip report because for a variety of different reasons. As Tom has indicated, AIS is very useful, has very high resolution, but it only has information for large vessels greater than or equal to 65 feet, of which we don't really have all that many in the Northeast region. VMS is another possibility. These issues with the VMS is not really required for all fisheries. So we know it is required for a number of fisheries, but not all of the different wind energy sites. It also requires speed rules that we enable to distinguish between when someone is fishing and when someone is transiting. And the other issue is that the reliability of those speed rules differs between different gear types, even among mobile gear, and it differs in terms of fixed gear. So there's some fundamental issues associated with applying some other alternative databases to this particular problem. Now, we ended up using an R package, and the R package allows for reproducibility and replicability. It also assures standardization. It's a shareable platform, and you have the opportunity to make sure that you have version control. So there's a really, so it's basically a way for multiple people to share basically development of the tool. Now, so I'm going to give you a little brief thing about one of the issues with the vessel trip reports. As everybody is probably familiar, you start out with a dot, that's in the underneath in the number 1, and that's a problem because essentially you're attributing the entire extent of a fishing trip to a single location. And we know that that's a problem. It also, basically, if you do that, you basically attribute everything that took place in either inside or outside an area to that single point. And Garrett DePiper, one of our team members, has developed a statistical method in order to that basically is basically the model is estimated from trips which have tow-by-tow information taken on with onboard observers. And that model is based on gear and trip duration, and it allows the capability to estimate the spatial extent of a fishing trip for trips that have not been that do not have an onboard observer. So essentially, what we're doing is basically you're taking you can see the concentric circles, and essentially what you're really saying is that you have the dot in the middle. The blue area is a range of which you have a greater certainty, and the green reflects a range where there's some level of uncertainty. It reflects some uncertainty in terms of the actual footprint for the region. When you apply this sort of decision rule across all trips in the Northeast region, you get a map that looks something like the one here on the right, and that is the spatial extent of fishing trips and revenues associated with all trips that are in the VTR in the Northeast region. So it basically provides some way to infer the entire extent of the potential exposure of fishing revenue in wind energy areas. The commercial fishery, at the moment we focus on the commercial fishery impact and measures. The standard ones, which would be annual landings and revenue, fishing effort, fishing dependence, basically by gear, port, fishery management plan, and things of that nature. These are in many respects the key metrics that we would normally do if we were conducting fishery impact analysis for a management measure that would be undertaken by any one of the fishery management councils. So in many respects, this would be what we would normally do as part of a fishery impact analysis. To give you some idea of putting everything together, the automation allows for a process where we can identify any particular shapefile, and these would be, the wind energy areas, and then any reconfiguration of a wind energy areas. You could actually re-automate, rerun the analysis for that. And then it's processed using the R package. So this is basically, this is all the information that's associated with fishing trips that are taking place inside those areas, and this would be what would be used in terms of, but filtered for confidentiality to respond to data requests. But we go beyond that and take that information, and we can render a report that produces a set of graphs and tables that provide information about the commercial fishing, the vulnerability of commercial fishing inside any these wind energy areas. In terms of next steps, we recognize that recreational fishing is potentially affected. So we do now, our next task is to add recreational fishing, we are currently in the process of using the Northeast Region Party Charter logbooks. So we're using the same information that we are using for the commercial fishery. We also are looking into a fish rules application that has been developed. It's a cell phone application that has geo-referenced, and people are actively checking the app for information about the rules and regulations that govern, what people may be able to retain on a private boat recreational trip. So we're looking into being able to use some of that information to evaluate the extent to which private boat anglers are actually using these wind energy sites, at least currently. The next really big step is to develop predictive models of effort redistribution, as many have already pointed out. Some activities will be able to continue to take place inside the energy areas, others will not be. So there's a major question as to whether or not the extent to which people may be able to fish elsewhere. And some people may not be able to do that, and others will. So we're trying to get to that next step to build adaptations into the base data set that we currently have. And that's kind of an overview of sort of the information and how it was assembled, and that it's going into the web page that it was launched, I think, yesterday or the day before, and Ben will be filling in some of the gaps in terms of what that tool can do.
Great. Eric, I'm going to squeeze in one question before we go to the next, just because it's very specific, and that is, VTR data is coarse, center point of fishing area rather than specific tow locations.
Correct.
And may misrepresent distribution of fishing activity. How did you account for this challenge?
Well, again, we have the models, that this model here that is designed, is based on actually observed trips. So we're actually taking observed trips, estimated statistical or predictive model, to apply to the unobserved trips. So it allows us to expand a fishing location to reflect a predicted entire fishing footprint for that trip as it may have occurred. There has been part of this analysis has been done to compare both how this particular approach compares to VMS information, and in general they compare reasonably well. But this is what again we had. The approach was selected specifically because we could do this for every fishery and across all regions, and we didn't have to depend on only VMS or AIS or some other type of alternative spatial information.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. And I might want to scan them into me when we come back. If we have time for questions, there will be others. But just to move us on, Angela, I'm turning it back to you. Thanks, Eric.
Sure thing. I'm gonna turn it right back over to Ben, and then we'll go back to Guy. Thank you for calling in, Guy. So Ben, I'll let you take over.
Okay, Ben, we can see your screen. We just need to have you off mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Beautiful. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. I've shared the screen, I've made it as big as possible. I don't have a set of slides today. I'm just going to go through this website, and I'm going to put the website in the chat box so you can follow along at home or browse it at your leisure. And this is one of the end products that Eric spoke of as part of the project that we're all working on here. So yeah, this website, socioeconomic impacts of Atlantic offshore wind development, launched I think yesterday, like you said. And well, in a nutshell, what we have here is the reports that that Eric was talking about. We've run them for every project area that we have a shapefile for, and that's an important thing to think about. All of the wind energy areas sort of have 3 types of designations or definitions, if you will. There's a lease number, and then there's a sort of a name put on that once the area gets leased, and then project areas have often been splitting the lease areas. So we did this at the project area level as we had it currently. And the summaries here have landings and valuations for each of these areas. And I just wanted to point out that the landings and valuations were drawn from dealer records that were matched to the VTR trips. So it's not values coming from the VTR itself. They're coming from the dealer records that have been matched. I can just open up one of these and show you what it looks like. Okay, should be take a second. There's a menu up here on the top left. There we go. So each one of these reports has, I'm not going to go through all the sections, but I just want to point out that there's information on impacted FMPs, species, gear types, revenue by ports, and some fishery dependence. And it's easy to navigate using these tables of contents. So you can scroll through or just jump to a section of interest for each one of these. And most of these have summary tables and basically like a top 10 species for each section that it's in. Let's see. For all of these reports, we're using data from 2008 through 2018 calendar year. The fishing footprint process takes a little while to put together once data are all sort of settled for a year. And so we're working on getting 2019 in here. So these will be updated once we were able to do that. But for now, it's 2008 through 2018. So there's 26 of these reports on here. And down at the bottom, there's a data download website where you can download information for yourself if you want to make your own tables and charts. And it's set up basically the same way. There's 4 sections. There's species, gear type, port of landing, and state of landing. So each the data are all summarized according to those factors. And all of the data are scrubbed for confidentiality, meaning for every data point you see, there's at least 3 dealers and 3 permits representing that point. All the pounds are landed pounds. All the data are from federal sources only. Sorry, I'm reading my bullet points, but a number of you, I'm sure, have made data requests and have seen this exact wordage, because this is what I put into the data requests I've sent out for any particular area. It's just the caveats of the data themselves. Going down to the summary tables. Yeah, so let's see, I'll just stick on the species here. You can filter some of this if you desire, like if you quickly want to see anything from 2017. It's going a little slow. It just filters out 2017, and then, if you just cared about the Mayflower wind area, that also comes up. And once you have your summary that you want, you can go down here. There's some buttons to download these things, either CSV or Excel format. And as you'll notice, you can't really see what you're typing in here. Haven't figured out how to fix that exactly, but it's simple enough to, if you want, you can just download everything. Do not filter it. Just hit that button here, the Excel button, and it'll download a sheet of everything. You can filter in Excel or something like that. Let's see. So all the values are presented in nominal values. So for 2018, those were the values as they were in 2018. And we've also included a a GDP deflator value here in 2019 dollars for all of these. I want to see what a fish in 2008 was worth in 2019. Let's see. I put another map on here. It's a little bit different than the map on the front page. It's interactive. You can move around, and I have the all of the project areas colored by state that they're sort of associated with, and you can mouse over them and see what they are, and refer back to the table if you're generating a summary based on something like that. Yeah, I guess the last point is, I have 4 things on here: species, gear, port, and state. If you look at the state, we also have a percentage of the total state nominal value, and so that's that refers to all of the value coming into that state, for that year from that particular project area. I guess the point is the percentage is always relative to the factor you're looking at. And let's see, and then to get back, just a link back to the main site there. And that's all I have on that.
Great, Ben, thank you. Terrific. One question for you, Ben, and then I see Dave Monty. When we finish our presenters, I'm going to go to you first for a question, but we'll get to the presentations first. But there's one question about what about boats that are less than 3 boats? Is that added in any way, sort of for smaller fishermen or smaller boats? How is that accounted for?
Yeah, good question. So in that case, we can't show it as an individual point, but there's in all of these there is a designation for all others. So that manifests itself. So here we're on the species summary. So basically, if there was a species that only 1 or 2 boats had targeted in ocean wind in 2018, it falls into this category.
Okay. Great.
So that's how we have to deal with it.
Right, Ben, and also as an Eric, I encourage you to look at the Menti and chat for questions. And when we come back at the end of a little time, maybe you guys just actually plow through some specific answers I think you can give. So thanks so much. So Angela, are we off to Guy next?
Yes, thank you, Guy, for calling in. We'll try again.
Okay, Guy, let's give this a shot. Let's see, and then, okay. So
Guy, now that you're on the phone, you may just need to hit *6 to unmute.
Let's see. Try, Guy, if you hit *6, that should unmute your phone. No. Okay, I'll tell you what. Maggie, would you maybe text with Guy? Let's actually go to Daphne if we can, and we're gonna make sure. Guy, actually speak. Guy, speak right now. No, shoot, I thought I saw you unmute. No. Okay, Maggie, let's do this. Can you text with Guy to try to see if we can find a way to get his good piece in here? We do not want to miss it. And what I'll do for the moment is actually go to Daphne if Daphne's willing. And then Guy, we will make sure one way or the other we get you in here. So hang tight for 1 second and Maggie will text you. Okay, Daphne, over to you.
It seems like Guy might be unmuted now. Try
Guy?
again.
No, yeah, it looks like he is, but then it's not going through, so we don't know why. Okay, Daphne, over to you, and we're going to text Guy to figure out what's going on.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
I'll put my slides up as soon as I have access.
Okay.
But thank you, everyone, for coming today. And this has been a really, really useful couple of days. So I want to express my appreciation for being included in this workshop. I'm Daphne Monroe. I'm from Rutgers University. I'm a shellfish ecologist, even though I'm presenting in this session. So I'll apologize in advance for all of the economists in the room who I'll step on things and, make incorrect or maybe not quite accurate statements. But I've been invited to come and talk about a project that I'm working on with a number of collaborators, and my collaborators are listed on the right. Andrew Sheld, he's an economist from VIMS, and he keeps me on the rails in terms of the economics piece of this project. He is also on this workshop today. So Andrew will be in the breakout rooms, I hope, and able to answer questions. Jennifer Beckensteiner was a postdoc with us. She's now moved back to France onto bigger and better things, but she was an incredible asset to the team. John Klink, Eileen Hoffman, and Mauricio Gonzalez Diaz from Old Dominion University have been part of this project. They're oceanographers down there at ODU. And Eric Powell and Laura Solinger from University of Southern Mississippi are our collaborators down there at USM, who are experts in shellfish fisheries and in particular know the surf clam industry quite well. As I said, this project was funded by BOEM and to take a kind of a deeper dive into looking at the interactions of the wind energy areas and surf clam industry. And I want to point out that we have some really incredible support on this project and really critical support, both on the management side. We've got advisors from NOAA's Northeast Fisheries Science Center, GARFO, former staffers who were from the council who are all giving us advice on the management side, and it'll be evident in a minute why that's important to the project. But really, really critical to the success of our modeling efforts here is the cooperation and collaboration of the industry folks who've been helping us out. And I want to point out just how, and we heard earlier about, how important it is to have engagement on that level, but it's also important to acknowledge that this takes time and takes effort on their part, and they're not being compensated necessarily for that. And so my huge, huge thanks to the role that they play. We would not be able to develop this model and do what we're doing with it with confidence without their input and their knowledge that they've been generously sharing. The picture in the background here shows, this is from the MARCO website. This is just the surf clam trips. This is so the heat map on the background, the more orange the colors, the more trips the surf clam industry is taking to those areas. And then you've got the wind energy areas overlaid there. And so you see that there's some spatial overlap there. Some of the important places that they fish are places that are slated for wind energy development. And so the surf clam fishery is particularly sensitive or is anticipated to be particularly vulnerable to these wind energy areas. And there's two aspects to that. One is that the spatial overlap that I just showed using the MARCO data, but there's also vulnerability in terms of the gear that they use. A couple of photos here of the vessels. The furthest on the right is a hydraulic dredge that they use in the fishery. And that hydraulic dredge uses, and Guy mentioned this already, I think that was Pete Hughes, uses forced water into the bottom to allow that dredge to actually penetrate the bottom and capture clams with less damage and less bycatch. And so it's really important tool for the fishery, but it's gear that makes them particularly vulnerable to not being able to fish in these wind energy areas. Likewise, their vessels are quite large and not very maneuverable. And this vulnerability is not something that's new. We've known this for a while. I'm showing a picture of a BOEM report from 2017, and I'm really excited to dig into Eric and Ben's data set and see what they see in terms of vulnerability for this fishery. But basically, if you just look at the footprint of the fishery and the revenue coming in from wind energy areas, plus consider the gear aspects, this fishery is potentially going to be excluded completely from wind energy areas. And that's a big deal. And we can look at that vulnerability in terms of just the revenue potential, but it's not that simple because we know that there's trade-offs. And in fishing, and if they're excluded from certain areas, what does that mean in terms of displacement of effort, and how will that feed back and cause other kinds of interactions with fishery productivity? Likewise, these vessels are big enough and that there is potential they may have to transit around certain parts of these areas. And if that becomes an issue, then how does that feed back into costs? And so there's a lot of things going on if you have displacement. And so what we're trying to do with this modeling effort, and we call our model CEPHIS, it's a spatially explicit, ecological, agent-based fisheries and economic simulator, which is kind of a mouthful, but the bottom line is we're trying in this model to estimate, to simulate the ecology, so the biology of the stock. You see a picture there in the middle. That's our model domain. And the colors there are the amount of clams that are in various 10-minute squares. The black squares are the ports we're using. And so basically the biology is being simulated based on what we know from stock assessment data and other experimental information. And we have been working very closely with the fishing industry to also add to this a fishery. Basically, that's the agent-based side of this. And in that term, we've got 33 vessels that are operating in the model. And those vessels are all parameterized to match the vessels that are in the fishery now and operational. So we have been, like I said, working with the industry to make sure that we're getting their catch rates right, their costs of operating right, their ability to get tune from the grounds and those kinds of things. And so and we've also been very, very fortunate to be able to talk with captains in the industry and learn from them about how they make decisions in terms of what kinds of weather are a problem for them to go out in. And what decisions do they make in terms of searching for new areas, because that's going to feed back into the whole displacement and whether they can or can't find other areas to fish. And then the product that's landed gets moved through a processor, and we've also been working with the industry on getting those calculations right. And in this model, we've also added a management submodel, and in that management submodel, the survey team goes out and surveys every year, and then that survey information gets fed back through a stock assessment calculation, and we're using the same kind of stock assessment calculation that's currently being used for this fishery right now. Dan Hennon's been a big help in making sure we're getting that right. And then every year we're getting a stock status calculation. And so as we've heard, and so in this fishery, the survey goes out on a commercial platform. And so if the fishery is excluded from these areas, the survey will also be excluded from these areas. And so there's going to be some emergent properties that'll come out of the model in terms of feedbacks there in management. And my timer just told me that I'm out of time, but I'm going to keep talking because I don't see a shark. And assume that Guy is still working on his sound. So here's a picture of some of the data validation. We're using real data to validate this model. So our model is giving us some dynamics, the boats go out and fish in various areas, and we want to make sure the model's not getting it wrong. And so this is a picture of the model domain. These are the 10-minute squares in our model. The tan areas are land, the ports are labeled, the wind energy areas are overlaid, and then these red dots are individual surf clam trips. And of course, we just heard from Eric that the centroid of those trips isn't necessarily the total fishing location, but and I'll caveat that we don't have all of the data included here yet. We're still waiting on some more data to be sent our way. But the point is we have real data that we're checking our model output against, things like trip locations, but also catch efficiency, how full the vessels are, how many times in different seasons do they get weathered out. For example, in the winter, do they take fewer trips than they would in the summer? And we're trying to capture all of that and get it as right as we can. Of course, it is a model. So ultimately, once we've got things working in a way that we're satisfied, and we're very close right now to that point, we're going to consider 3 scenarios. One in which it's business as usual and fishing and transit can happen, no problem, they can fish anywhere. Second scenario where they will be able to travel through wind energy areas, but will not be able to fish in that footprint. And then the third is kind of the worst case scenario where they will be forced to transit around a wind energy area as well as being unable to fish there. And then we'll compare those in order, the comparison of those three scenarios will be able to give us a way to estimate the overall economic consequences of these wind energy areas to the fishery. And so I'll close out here with a plug for our next steps on this. We've been funded through the Scallop Research Set Aside program to take this same approach and create an agent-based model that would represent the scallop fishery and make some of these same kind of calculations. And so we're just getting started on that. And I know there's probably some scallop fishermen on the workshop, and I'd be delighted to hear from you. We're going to need to have that same level of engagement and knowledge sharing from the scallop fishery to get our model tuned up. And so I'll close out by saying we're also looking, we've lost our postdoc, and we're looking for a postdoc to join our team. So plug for postdoc applicants if anybody's interested.
Thank you,
Patrick.
Thank you so much. Really great. Just because of time, I want to go to Guy, so we're going to give this a shot. So, Guy, I'm going to turn to
Can you
you.
hear me, Pat?
Oh, yes, you sound great.
Okay. Somebody's slide to put up from me.
Yeah, let's.
I need to release the sharing, right?
Daphne will stop sharing her screen. Guy, and we'll put yours up. Give us just 1 second. So.
All right. I'm Guy Simmons with Sea-Watch International. Sea-Watch International is the harvest, well, actually, it's a processor of surf clams and ocean quahogs. And our principal owners are the owners of TMT Clam, which are also harvesters of the surf clam ocean quahog. We have 4 processing plants in Maryland, Delaware, Massachusetts, and Maine. TMT Clams has 3 port facilities in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Oceanside, New York, and New Bedford, Massachusetts, with 20 vessels at sea operating with hydraulic dredges. I'm going to take a 40,000-foot view, take Andrew's helicopter way up. Some of the economic decisions that have to be considered by businesses, whether you're a single boat owner, multiple boat owner plus processor, distribution dealer, all those things. And one of the things that we first have to look at is the loss of fishing access in the wind energy areas. And we heard a couple of comments from the guys across the pond that they were restricted in some areas. It does not seem like there's going to be regulatory issues right now restricting us from fishing within wind energy areas. However, the decision still has to be made based on a safety choice. Do we put our vessels in there? Is the spacing of the turbines adequate for us to safely operate? And what might be the interaction with buried cables and cable mats? Cable mats are another big issue, particularly for those who are pulling a trawl net or folks like us that are using a hydraulic dredge, which actually goes into the bottom of the ocean. The second big issue from a business standpoint is the ability for NIMS to go out and do at-sea surveys. And if we lose that ability to get that physical biological survey, it's naturally going to go to a more conservative management stance, which potentially could decrease in quotas. Now, quotas are huge when you're making capital decisions. Do you build a new boat? Do you upgrade your technology in your plant? Do you spend a lot of money? If the ability to catch more clams is reduced, those decisions are pretty easy to make. They're not the ones you want to make, but the answer is no. With the reduction of access or reduction in quota, most likely it would be a reduction in jobs. I mean, I learned early on from Barney Frank that it's all about the jobs and it's about the communities that they support. And in that specific instance, it was New Bedford. Most fishing companies or fishing captains are multi-generational. We are 4th generation in our company. It's largely entrepreneurial. And the jobs that we provide, well, we provide over the last 42 years, they're long-standing, good-paying jobs with good benefits, and we're feeding the nation with sustainable and healthy food. So that's a very important fact. Now, some of the business decisions that are going to be thrust upon us, they're not really decisions. They may be effects of offshore wind. We talked at great length yesterday. I greatly appreciate the conversations on the cold pool. We've got experts on this, and I am really looking forward to more science around the cold pool as far as larval production and distribution, even the effects on the weather in the Bight. The electromagnetic fields generated by cables. I actually learned something yesterday, which is great, that there's a difference between EMF and electricity itself. And that came to my mind when I read a study out of Scotland where they actually use electric probes in the sand to make clams move to the surface. Hopefully the electronic magnetic field won't do that, but I think it really needs some more study to see that. We talked a lot about turbidity even today with the phytoplankton and zooplanktons. There's obviously some good sourcing there, but I think there's more that can be learned. When we make those business decisions about fishing in the wind energy arrays, Fred did a good job of explaining the risk that's involved. And one of those, we may be told by our insurance companies that we can't go within, 2, 4, 5 miles of a wind turbine. We don't know yet. And for those of you who are wondering if we've asked yet, no, we haven't, because we don't want to give our insurers a head start on getting our rates up or possibly denying us. I can't emphasize enough, and this is, I'm shifting gears to a hydraulic dredge company, that the potential interaction with a cable that's buried, that may be unburied by a hydraulic dredge or maybe unburied by a storm, that interacts with a 32,000-pound dredge with a 180-inch cutting bar on it, I shiver just to think what could happen. So the matting and the covering of those cables is also an issue for, like I said, trawl nets and hydraulic dredges. So we have to be cognizant of that, and those are more safety decisions that we need to make as a company. And I would just say that everything that Fred said about the effectiveness of the interference for radar, that's top of the list for safety. And I hope that those things are looked at much more closely. And to close, I would say, we need to follow the science here. And it's become a cliche, follow the science, not only in the pandemic, but when making these decisions on potentially displacing long time, 300-year plus fisheries that provide good jobs and provide the nation with sustainable, healthy seafood, we need to get it right. So we need to follow the science. And to be quite honest with you, the shark's not gotten big yet, so I'm okay. I've been dreading this meeting for weeks only because of the timeline. And I can tell you that it has flown by, and I have been ecstatic as to the information that's been put forth. And I'd like to thank everybody who was involved in putting it together and presenting. So let's follow the science and do it right the first time.
Great. I thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks. Sorry for the technical trouble, sir. Thanks for getting that fixed.
All right.
We are going to go probably about 5 minutes to at least get some things in. So Dave Monti, you've been waiting, so I'm going to unmute you or ask to unmute you, and we'll see if you can, if we can get you to go. Okay, Dave, if you're on the, and see if we can get you to unmute. Okay, Dave, that should do it. Speak if you can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Ask away.
Okay. Great. I'd just like to thank Ben and Eric from NOAA for that great work in breaking out wind farms and its economic impact on commercial fishing. And I loved the end that, where do we go from here? Recreational fishing has a great impact, as we know in this nation as well. Both commercial and recreational fishing are important from an economic perspective. In my state, I think recreational fishing has a sales impact of 412 million and 333 million for commercial, according to Fisheries Economics of the United States. So some states differ. Florida recreational fishing is on top. In Massachusetts, it's far greater than commercial fishing. So we have this great impact. And this led me and my colleagues. I am a member of the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers, which has about 7,500 members in New England, but I'm also a charter captain and a member of the Rhode Island Party and Charter Boat Association. And this economic impact was led our president, Rick Bellavance, to do a study during the Deepwater Wind construction of the Block Island Wind Farm. And we were able to show the economic impact on our industry during construction of that wind farm. It enabled us to posture for mitigation. Those mitigation funds were used to market the industry overall, the charter fishing industry in the shoulder season. So it worked out great. But my question is that not just for mitigation, most importantly, from my observation with recreational anglers, is wind farms at Block Island. The wind farm at Block Island has had a positive impact on fish abundance in that area in spite of enhanced fishing pressure. And we heard this earlier today. Fishing pressure anecdotally has increased 100 to 200%. I was there this Friday and there was a Connecticut party boat there. There was a New York party boat. There were private charter boat. There were charter boats and private anglers fishing October 12th in the wind farm for scup and sea bass. So with this positive impact, with the studies that we've seen from Europe with greater fish abundance in wind farms, I think that we need to also do some studies where we measure the positive impacts on fish abundance for recreational fishing in wind farms. And I see that as a big void, but I'm hearing this up and down the coast in New Jersey, New York, et cetera. Recreational anglers are greeting wind farms in hopes that in areas where there are no fish, there's actually going to be fish created. So I urge NOAA in BOEM and ROTA to put some effort to study the positive impacts on recreational fishing.
Great, Dave, thank you so much, appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, so we have just a few minutes left before lunch. I just want to turn to Angela and the panelists. If there's any final questions, there are many in the Menti. Some are about cabling, which are more kind of operational questions. Some are about kind of the impacts of multiple uses on the benthos and how you look at those collectively. And there are some specific questions to each of you as well. But in the last few minutes, first, I know, Eric, if there's any final kind of points you want to make as we begin to wrap up.
I think the only point I would actually make is that one of the advantages to the broad scale approach that we have taken is with a view to cumulative effects. So that is one of the things that we will be able to provide, information about, essentially the cumulative effects of individual wind farms. The other issue, of course, would be adaptation. As wind energy areas, as one place comes in, it will displace people. They will be able to go someplace else. But when the next one comes in, now you've got less opportunity to fish elsewhere. So that's one of the things that I think is really important, is that it sets up a more informed cumulative effects analysis.
Right. Eric, thank you. Ben, how about you? Any kind of final words for today from your perspective?
Not necessarily. I mean, I could answer a couple of the questions, I guess. Somebody asked about availability of the tool. The tool itself, the R package that we talked about, is an internal tool, basically because the data are internal. But the results are all out there on the website and available to anybody.
Great. All right. Daphne, any kind of final responses to quick questions or just reflections as we wrap up? And Daphne, you're on mute. Not sure why I can't.
Thanks. No, that took a little bit. I think I was blocked from unmuting. Yeah, I think thank you for the opportunity for a closing thought, Patrick. And one of the things that I want to emphasize, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, is how important it is in these kinds of, like, in trying to take a kind of holistic perspective on impacts and vulnerability. It's really, really important to have, the input of the fishermen at the table. And like I said, it's our project in particular has benefited from a wealth of knowledge, and it's not just the data that are being shared by the fishermen. It's ideas and thoughts and kind of some of their intuitive knowledge of the system. And in particular with clams, I mean, in terms of impact and what's going to happen, we're totally making guesses here. Yesterday, Hans Burchard was asked a question about benthic impacts to clams in Europe, and his answer was, "We don't have clams. We don't have a clam fishery," And so with this, there's no precedent for us to look to elsewhere in terms of the impacts to this fishery. And so the only place we have is to go to the fishermen themselves. And really, we need to. I think that's a great model in terms of all of the fisheries really need to get that knowledge on the table. That's really, really important.
Great. Thanks, Steph. And Guy, any quick final words as we begin to?
Yeah, if I may add that I saw one question in the queue about telecommunication cables and have they ever been dredged up? And I think there's at least one guy on this Zoom meeting that has done that in the past. We were able to work very closely with the state of New Jersey back in the 90s with the federal consistency when those cables went in for burial depths and locations and things like that. So that was, I don't know, a half a dozen or 7 cables, and at 21.8 gigawatts, you're talking probably 2,500 wind turbines and all connected with cables. So cables are an issue, and it's something we really need to study and be cognizant of. But I'll also say that with all the valuable science that was presented, and the presenters did a fantastic job, and I learned so much, it also pointed out what we don't know. And some of the things that we don't know, just like Daphne said, we have no reference from Europe on a clam fishery. There is no clam fishery in the world like ours. It's just the way our continental shelf is built. We are unique to the world, and plus we've got the cold pool that's just spitting out larvae every day, it seems like. So just more science, and more science. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay, real quickly, we're going to do an orientation for this afternoon and send you off to lunch. So Lane, can you pull up? Great. All right, so these are the breakout sessions for this afternoon. Sharing ports, focus on floating, integrating fisheries and wildlife, dock to plate market considerations, and then safety at sea. We covered much of that this morning. So the key is we are going to reconvene. Thank you very much for that slide, Glenn. That's great. We're going to reconvene right at 1 o'clock. But what we'd like everyone to do, Meg, I'm going to turn it over to you to explain what we asked people to do right now so we can get to breakout groups efficiently. We're getting better at this as we go. So Maggie, do you want to give a quick instruction for what to do now?
Hi, yes. For those of you that were on yesterday, this may sound a little bit familiar, but just before you head off to lunch, if you don't mind renaming yourself by going into your participants tab and hovering over your name and just adding in to your name the number of the group you would like to join. Then you can step away, and while you guys are at lunch, I'll just pre-assign everybody and we should be able to move smoothly into our breakouts. So again, if you click on your participants tab and then hover over your name, you should be able to rename yourself.
Okay. So
and I just put in the chat the numbers of each of the groups. Sorry, Pat, for cutting you off.
No problem at all. Again, put the number next to your name before you go to lunch. We will therefore be more efficient. And then right at 1 o'clock, we're going to reconvene, and then we're going to be able to send everybody off to the breakouts for hopefully 50 minutes of discussion about those topics that we named just in front of you. So we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock East Coast time on the top of the hour. Thank you, panelists, presenters. Great questions and comments. Really appreciate it. We're saving all the Menti in the chat for the authors and section authors and the like. We'll see you at 1. Put your number next to your name before we go to lunch. Have a good one. We'll be in touch soon. Thank you.